Here we got a company that's issuing bonds with detachable warrants, and we're asked here to record the issuance of those bonds and get the right amount put into equity for the warrants and the right amount put into debt for the bonds. However, we're not quite certain yet how to split up the value that goes to each account. We simply know that we have $100 million face value of these bonds. They're issued at 103% of their face value, but the assumption is that's because they've got this warrant attached to them. So they're sold at a premium, not necessarily because the interest rate is attractive, but perhaps some of the premium is also because it's got the warrant. Now, the first thing I'm just going to quickly do is figure out the proceeds that were received as a result of issuing the bonds. And so to get that, it's fairly simple. You take the 100 million, I'll just cut off all the zeros, times 1.03. So the bonds and the warrants together are sold for $103 million. But now the question we've got to answer is how much of that cash goes to the bonds and how much goes to the warrants. And we learned two methods, one called the proportional method and one method called the incremental method. And remember, the proportional method, well, I don't even need to write that, but both of those methods went under the assumption that we could come up with the allocation of the proceeds based on the fair market value of each of those two securities had they been sold separately. Now we do know right up here that we're told that each warrant sells for $3 on the open market on a stock exchange shortly after the issuance of this bond. So we have to figure out, well, how many warrants are there, and we can easily determine the fair market value of all the warrants. So what I'm going to do to figure that out is we have $100 million worth of bonds. 100, see if I can get all the zeros in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. $100 million of bonds. They have a face value each of $100 million, and each bond is a $1,000 sold in $1,000 increments. So that tells me we have, I think that says 100,000 bonds, and each bond gives the holder an option of the 20 warrants. It's not an option, they just get the warrants. So we take the bonds times 20, and that tells us that there are 2 million, let me just check the, 2 million warrants issued with the bonds, and we know each warrant has a $3 market value. So the market value relative to the warrants, $6 million. I can do that in my head. So let me just get rid of some of this stuff here. We have $6 million. Oops. $6 million going to the warrants. And we need to figure out the fair market value of the bonds. Now you can sit here and look through this problem forever. You won't find the fair market value of the bonds because that's not given to us. The 103%, remember, is the market value of both of those things sold together. So we have to be told explicitly what the fair market value of the bonds are if they were sold separately from the warrants in order to use the proportional method. So at this point we have no idea what the fair market value of the bonds are. That means we can't use the proportional method. The proportional method assumes you know the fair market value of both of the items issued together. So we have to use the incremental method, and the incremental method is actually easier than the proportional method. The incremental method says, okay, let's figure out how much, what are the proceeds you've received, 103 million. Okay, well, you need to know the fair market value of at least one of those two securities that were issued, and we do. We know the fair market value of the warrants. And the incremental method says, okay, well then apply the entire fair market value to that security. So that means the bonds get whatever's left over. And that is 97 million. Okay, so now we've figured out how much of the 103 goes to the warrants and how much of the 103 goes to the bonds. So now we can proceed with what the journal entry would look like for the organization issuing this bond. I'm going to split it up into two pieces. I'm going to record the issuance of the bonds separate from the issuance of the warrants, and I'll do the warrants first because they're easier by a little bit. So we would put $6 million of cash to the applied to the warrants, and what would happen is we would credit this paid-in capital stock warrant account for $6 million. So that's an equity account. So there, we put some of the proceeds into equity, and the remainder goes into debt, into the warrant. So that would be for $97 million. And let me skip a line here. What we know is that the bonds payable have a face value of $100 million. Because the problem tells us that up here, $100 million. That's the face value. And debits don't equal credit. That logically tells us that we have a discount of $3 million. You could choose to combine these entries into one entry, but I chose to keep them separate, just so it's easier to see how much goes to the bonds versus how much goes to the warrant. So that's the extent of the first requirement of the problem.